Today, we're going to dive into one of history's most fascinating mysteries. It's a story from the Quran about a powerful, incredibly pious ruler known as Dhu'l-Qarnayn. So, take a look at this. It's a classic Persian miniature, and it shows a legendary king building this massive wall to hold back the forces of chaos. His name, Dhu'l-Qarnayn, literally translates to the owner of two horns. But who was he? Was he a king, a prophet, something else? And what in the world do the horns represent? To figure that out, we have to go back to the very beginning of his story.
You see, this story doesn't just appear out of thin air. The way it was revealed has its own fascinating backstory, and it all started with a challenge.
Okay, so picture this. It's 7th century Makkah. The leaders of the Quraysh tribe are trying to figure out if Muhammad's claims of prophethood are real. So, on the advice of some local Jewish rabbis, they come up with 3 questions about ancient stories that pretty much nobody in Arabia would know. And one of them was this exact question. They were told that if he could answer it, he was a true prophet. Well, the answer came, and it came in the 18th chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Kahf. And it did a lot more than just satisfy their curiosity. It laid out this epic narrative with some incredibly deep lessons. So what did it actually say? The Quran tells us about 3 great journeys taken by Dhu'l-Qarnayn, a man who God had given immense power and the ability to get pretty much anything done. His first trip takes him as far west as you can possibly go, to a place where it looks like the sun was literally setting in a pool of murky water. And there, he finds a group of people and is given a choice from God: punish them or be kind to them. He chooses justice, promising to punish anyone who did wrong, but to reward the faithful. Next, he goes to the complete opposite end of the earth, the farthest east, and there he comes across a people who had no shelter at all from the rising sun. The story just mentions that God knew exactly what Dhu'l-Qarnayn was up to, and he continued on his way. His third journey, though, leads him to a place between 2 massive mountain ranges. The people he finds there can barely understand his language. They were being terrorized by these destructive tribes known as Yajuj and Majuj, or Gog and Magog. They were desperate, and they begged him to build a wall to keep them safe, even offering to pay him for it. Now, his response here tells you everything you need to know about his character. He flat out refuses any payment. He says what my Lord has provided me is better and just asks for their help with the labor. Then he masterminds this incredible engineering project. He has them stack blocks of iron, heats them with bellows until they're glowing red hot, and then pours molten copper all over it. The result? A barrier so tough that Gog and Magog couldn't climb it or smash through it. An incredible story like that has, of course, led to centuries of debate. If Dhu'l-Qarnayn was a real historical person, who could he possibly be? Let's take a look at the main suspects. The thing is, each candidate seems to fit parts of the story, but none of them are a perfect match. Alexander the Great is a really popular choice, often linked to the story through old legends and coins. The biggest problem, though? He was a polytheist, which clashes with the Quran's description of a devout monotheist. Then you've got Cyrus the Great of Persia. He was a monotheist, and his empire stretched from east to west. And finally, some older traditions point to a king from South Arabia, but a lot of scholars today think those stories were written much later. The biggest clue really is in the name, the 2 horns. With Alexander, the connection is pretty obvious. We have coins that show him with the horns of the ram god Zeus Ammon, which was a symbol of divine power. For Cyrus, the evidence is this relief sculpture from his capital, Pasargadae. This winged figure, which for a long time people thought was Cyrus, is wearing a crown with 2 very clear horns. So the name could be symbolic, like ruling the 2 horns of the world, east and west. Or it could be literal. All this historical detective work is really fun, but it might just be distracting us from the real point of the story. What if the important part isn't who he was, but what he represents? To understand the story's real power, we have to look at where it's placed. It's not just some standalone tale, it's a key part of a much larger and incredibly significant chapter. The story appears in Surah Al-Kahf, which means the cave. Now, in Islamic tradition, reciting this chapter, especially on Fridays, is seen as a kind of spiritual shield against the major trials of the end times, which are personified by a figure called the Dajjal or the Antichrist. And this is where it all clicks. Scholars explain that the Dajjal is meant to bring 4 huge trials to humanity, And amazingly, Surah Al-Kahf contains 4 corresponding stories that act as a sort of survival guide. The story of the youths in the cave is about the trial of faith. The man with 2 gardens is about the trial of wealth. The story of Moses and Khidr deals with the trial of knowledge. And finally, our story, the story of Dhu'l-Qarnayn, is the answer to the trial of power. So what does this story teach us about power? Well, it's not just about building walls. It's about humility. Remember, he refused to be paid. It's about sincerity. He did it all for God's sake, not for his own fame. It's basically a masterclass on how to use immense authority with justice and piety, and to always remember that this world isn't permanent, and all your strength comes from a higher source. Ultimately, this figure becomes more than just one historical person. He becomes something much more universal. You know, the endless search for one specific guy in history might be missing the forest for the trees. Dhu'l-Qarnayn works as an archetype, the perfect ruler, the just leader, the powerful servant of God who uses all his abilities not to conquer and take, but to protect and establish justice. And his words, after he finishes this monumental wall, they're the key to his whole character. He doesn't take any credit. He doesn't boast about his genius. He immediately says, "This is a mercy from my Lord." That right there, that ultimate act of humility, is the defining lesson of his power. So, the legend of Dhu'l-Qarnayn isn't just a historical puzzle to be solved. It's a timeless moral challenge for all of us. It forces us to ask, how should great power be used for good? When we're faced with chaos, do we build walls of division or do we build bridges of mercy? In our own age of incredible power and influence, what kind of barrier are we building? And who is it really meant to protect?